everyone. Welcome back to all my listeners. Now, I hope you're all having a great day so far. I know I am. Now, if it's your first time finding me, thanks so much. Come on in and welcome. Welcome to a brand new season, Season 6. Today is my second episode, and it's Wednesday, May 11th, 2022. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. Now, all right, you guys, you know I'm up here in the Midwest, and I've been complaining a bit with the cold and the wind and the rain this particular spring. But today, as I record this lovely episode, it has clocked in where I live at 88 degrees. Oh my goodness, it feels like summer up here already, and spring just kind of flashed forward super fast. Anyway, I'm happy it's warmer. Hope it's warm somewhere where you all are and you're enjoying some springtime flowers. Mine have blown away, but hopefully more will start to bloom. Anyway, you guys, welcome. Welcome, like I said, to my second episode of the new season. So today I'm going to head us back into my Back to Basics, and today is going to be the second feature, the final feature, for my medical and surgical package. And you know what it is. It's the second Wednesday of the month already, right? And that features my very special, very newsworthy update on the OIG Work Plan for April 2022. And I go ahead and close out today's episode with some inspirational words on vision and leadership from acclaimed author Jonathan Swift. If you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and our valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve your coding accuracy as you help all of your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and kindly drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to my podcast. I'd really love your support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the news, current healthcare industry news, my compliance tips and recommendations based on my over 10 years of experience in front office, in back end, in coding, in billing for multi-specialty physicians, compliance, and auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. So, let's get into Newsworthy. Now, it's the second Wednesday of the month, so that means even in Season 6, I'm going to be diving into the OIG Work Plan updates. Now, the first OIG Work Plan update for April 2022 is titled Identifying Gaps in the Receipt of Recommended Care Among Medicaid Beneficiaries with HIV. Now, this is a report coming from the Office of Evaluations and Inspections. People with HIV can improve their health and prevent HIV transmissions by receiving recommended HIV care. But certain groups with HIV, such as African Americans, are less likely to receive regular HIV care compared to other groups. Medicaid plays an important role in providing care to people with HIV, as it is the single largest source of insurance for people living with HIV. This OIG study will identify the extent to which Medicaid beneficiaries diagnosed with HIV receive care that aligns with the widely used federal performance measures, both overall and by selected demographic factors that include race, ethnicity, sex, and location. Identification of potential gaps and disparities in care can help CMS, states, and managed care organizations identify areas for improvement to ensure that Medicaid beneficiaries with HIV receive care that improves health outcomes and reduces HIV transmission. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2023. Now, the second OIG Work Plan update for April 2022 is titled Electronic Visit Verification System for Medicaid In-Home Services. Now, this report is coming from the Office of Audit Services. All states must implement electronic visit verification or EVV for personal care services or PCS by January 1st, 2020, and for home health services by January 1st of 2023, as required by the 21st Century Cures Act. Now, CMS granted a one-year extension until January 1st of 2021 for the vast majority of states to meet this EVV requirement for PCS. Once implemented, EVV could increase the risk that Medicaid beneficiaries' needs are not being met, potentially compromising their health and their safety. Now, the OIG's objectives are to determine whether the state, number one, has implemented an EVV system in accordance with federal and state requirements, and number two, if the state has developed policies and procedures when using EVV to ensure that Medicaid beneficiaries receive their required in-home services. Now, this final report is also expected in fiscal year 2023. Now, the third OIG Work Plan update for April 2022 is titled Medicaid Rehabilitation Services Made by Community Residence Providers. Now, this report is coming from the Office of Audit Services. States can provide optional rehabilitation services under Medicaid programs available to adults with developmental disabilities and children and adolescents with serious emotional issues in certain community residential settings, like group homes or supervised apartments. These residential rehabilitation services may include training and assistance with daily living skills, medication management, socialization, substance use disorder services, and parent training. Services are designed to improve or maintain the beneficiary's ability to remain and function in the community, as well as develop greater independence. Prior OIG audits of these services over a decade ago identified significant deficiencies. They determine whether states claimed federal Medicaid reimbursement for rehabilitation services provided by community residence providers in accordance with federal and state requirements. In addition, the OIG will determine whether previously audited states have made improvements to their Medicaid community residence rehabilitation programs based on the prior year's recommendations. Now, this final report is also expected in fiscal year 2023. Now, the fourth and final OIG Work Plan update for April 2022 is titled Use of Medications for Opioid Use Disorder, or MOUD, in Medicaid. Now, this report is coming from the Office of Evaluations and Inspections. Deaths from opioid overdoses surged to unprecedented levels during the COVID-19 pandemic. As of April 2021, 75,000 people died from opioid overdoses in the preceding 12 months, or a 35% increase from the same period the year before. Now, access to medications that treat opioid use disorders, known as MOUD, is essential to address the high rates of opioid addiction and overdose mortality. Medicaid covers almost 40% of non-elderly adults with opioid use disorder, or OUD, which underscores the key role that this program can play in providing access to MOUD, or medications. Now, this particular study will examine the extent to which our beneficiaries diagnosed with opioid use disorders receive the medications in Medicaid. Now, this final report is expected once again in fiscal year 2023. All right, so at last, a shorter work plan, right, than prior months that I've disclosed, right? 11, 12, 13 in prior months during this pandemic. But nevertheless, I think this is focused work on the Medicaid program that's incredibly necessary, right? These reports underscore that the population in the U.S. most in need and most often are the ones to be last seen or the last heard and the last helped. So in my opinion, I always pass this detailed information on to our providers who need it to review their coding and billing practices or their overarching compliance programs. I think these reports with findings are always most interesting, right? So I always look forward to analyzing them in the years ahead. It's so important for my listeners to please pay attention to these monthly OIG Work Plan updates to see how they may impact you, your provider, and your health system. And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. So, in today's new Back to Basics compliance tip, as I promised last week, I'm going to be wrapping up my second installment of the medical surgical package. Now, last week I went over items 1 and 2 of the medical surgical package, and I emphasized that it's really important to follow coding guidelines and payer policies when it comes to bundling and unbundling what you can and cannot bill, services that involve more than meets the eye, right? So to speak. So for this week, it's the same emphasis and the same focus, right? But I'm going to be diving into more of the surgical package this week in the specific items 3 through 14. So let's start with number 3. If an endoscopic procedure is performed at the same patient encounter as a non-endoscopic procedure to ensure that no intraoperative injury occurred or to verify that the procedure was performed correctly, the endoscopic procedure is not separately reportable with the non-endoscopic procedure. Moving on, number 4. Many procedures require cardiopulmonary monitoring, either by the physician performing the procedure or an anesthesia practitioner. Since these services are integral to the procedure, they are not separately reportable. Examples of these services include cardiac monitoring, pulse oximetry, and ventilation management. And you can find these in CPT codes 93000 through 93010 and CPT code 93040 through 93042 and CPT code 94760 and CPT code 94761. Now, for the next section, number 5, the NCC provider manual addresses for us to see section number A in the introduction, which I already went through last week. Now, moving on to number 6. Exposure and exploration of the surgical field is integral to an operative procedure and is not separately reportable. For example, an exploratory laparotomy, which is specifically our CPT code 49000, is not separately reportable with an intra-abdominal procedure. If exploration of the surgical field results in additional procedures other than the primary procedure, the additional procedures may generally be reported separately. However, a procedure designated by the CPT code descriptor as a, quote, separate procedure, end quote, is not separately reportable if performed in a region anatomically related to the other procedure or procedures through the same skin incision, orifice, or surgical approach. Number 7. If a definitive surgical procedure requires access through diseased tissue, like if it's necrotic skin or an abscess or a hematoma or a seroma, a separate service for this access, like if it's for a debridement procedure or incision and drainage procedure, these are not separately reportable. Types of procedures to which this principle applies include, but are not limited to, ectomies, otomies, excisions, resections, plasties, insertions, revisions, replacements, relocations, removals, or closures. For example, debridement of skin and subcutaneous tissue at the site of an abdominal incision made to perform an intra-abdominal procedure is not separately reportable. And here they tell us, the reader, to go ahead and move on and cross-check these facts with Chapter 4, Section 1 for general policy statements, subsection 11 for guidance on reporting debridement with open fractures and dislocations. Now let's move on to number 8. If there's removal, destruction, or other form of elimination of a lesion that requires coincidental elimination of other pathology, only the primary procedure may be reported. For example, if an area of pilondial disease contains an abscess, incision and drainage of the abscess during the procedure to excise the area of a pilondial disease, it's not separately reportable. Now, let's move on to number 9. An excision and removal, or an ectomy, includes the incision and opening, or the otomy, of the organ. So a HCPCS code or a CPT code for an otomy procedure shall not be reported with an ectomy code for the same organ. Number 10, multiple approaches to the same procedure are mutually exclusive of one another and shall not be reported separately. For example, both a vaginal hysterectomy and abdominal hysterectomy shall not be reported separately. Number 11, if a procedure using one approach fails and is converted to a procedure using a different approach, only the completed procedure may be reported. For example, if a laparoscopic hysterectomy is converted to an open hysterectomy, only the open hysterectomy procedure code may be reported. Number 12, if a laparoscopic procedure fails and is converted to an open procedure, the physician shall not report a diagnostic laparoscopy instead of the failed laparoscopic procedure. For example, if a laparoscopic cholecystectomy is converted to an open cholecystectomy, the physician shall not report the failed laparoscopic cholecystectomy nor a diagnostic laparoscopy. Now, number 13, if a diagnostic endoscopy is the basis for and precedes an open procedure, the diagnostic endoscopy may be reported with modifier 58 appended to the open procedure code. However, the medical record must document the medical reasonableness and the medical necessity for the diagnostic endoscopy. A scout endoscopy to assess the anatomic landmarks and extent of disease is not separately reportable with an open procedure. When an endoscopic procedure fails and is converted to another surgical procedure, only the completed surgical procedure may be reported. The endoscopic procedure is not separately reportable with the completed surgical procedure. Now, finally, number 14. Treatment of complications of primary surgical procedures is separately reportable with some limitations. The global surgical package for an operative procedure includes all intraoperative services that are normally a usual and necessary part of the procedure. Additionally, the global surgical package includes all medical and all surgical services required of the surgeon during the postoperative period of the surgery to treat complications that do not require return to the operating room. Thus, treatment of a complication of a primary surgical procedure is not separately reportable. If number 1, if it represents usual and necessary care in the operating room during the procedure, or number 2, if it occurs postoperatively and does not require return to the operating room. For example, control of hemorrhage is a usual and necessary component of a surgical procedure in the operating room and is not separately reportable. Control of postoperative hemorrhage is also not separately reportable unless the patient must be returned to the operating room for treatment. In the latter case, the control of hemorrhage may be separately reportable with modifier 78. So, I hope you remember to read your NCCI coding manual as often as you need to, at least annually, to keep up with revisions. Now, I know I said this back in season 1, way back, long time ago, that I do reread every quarter this NCCI coding manual as it applies to the types of providers and clients that I have today. So hopefully you are using some sort of an online tool that pairs up codes and you can see if there is a CCI edit at play between these two codes, sometimes even more codes, right? That's going to depend on your surgical specialty and the services that you offer to your patient population. It's so important for providers to stay involved in their coding and billing practices. And I know I love mine when they call and they really want to get into it and they want to help get things right from the very start. It's fundamental if you have Medicare as a payer to keep your eye on correct and compliant coding and billing practices and make sure that you are adhering to all of them and you're meeting all of the medical necessity from the very start. Because when the documentation paints the medical picture with clarity and vibrancy from the onset of care, a certified medical coder, can then abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, I focus Season 6's Spark on vision and leadership. I want this 6th season spark to be filled with the world's thought leaders, writers, artists, philosophers, everyone who inspires the need for vision and leadership in all we strive to do. So, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from acclaimed author Jonathan Swift. Vision is the art of seeing the invisible. Absolutely true, right? I think this quote inspires us, reminds us that we all have vision. Vision for our lives. Vision for all that we want. Vision for all that we cannot even see. We are all capable of envisioning the very best for ourselves, for our futures. I'm happy Jonathan Swift's spark still burns brightly in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. And as always, I appreciate you all diving into today with me. And if you want more information from me, please go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Please have an amazing week ahead, and please continue staying safe and healthy. Thank you so much for listening in on today's episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.